Anissa Evans Buckner, and I am so pleased to see so many of you in attendance for our combined Lyceum and STEM Scholars Academy guest lecture series this morning. This event today demonstrates how well joint collaborative efforts are designed on our campus. Our program will proceed as printed with greetings and purpose brought to us by Mrs. Georgette Wiley. Mrs. Tisha Arnold will come afterwards to introduce our speaker for this morning.
Good morning also.
Good morning.
On behalf of Dr. Lawrence V. Alexander, Chancellor of the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, the 2015 UAPB Lyceum Committee, and the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, or STEM Scholars Academy Guest Lecture Series, I extend very warm, hot actually, and heartfelt greetings. UAPB, along with other universities in the University of Arkansas system, have standing committees that perform designated responsibilities to the benefit of the specific university and the system at large. The purpose of UAPB's Lyceum Committee is to develop a cultural and entertaining program to meet the varying needs and interests of students. While primarily designated for university students, the program is also open to the Pine Bluff community. When UAPB's Lyceum Committee met to plan this program, the committee discussed not only possible presenters, but also partnerships across content areas that would enhance the program. Partnerships, as successful entrepreneurs will tell you, are the keystone to success, because you cannot do today's job with yesterday's methods and plan to be in business tomorrow. Therefore, once the committee selected the world-renowned engineer, Mrs. Raye Jean Montague, as the presenter, the committee immediately reached out to the STEM Scholars Academy Guest Lecture Series and joined in partnership to present this program. Some key components of the STEM Academy initiatives include the guest lecture series, the advisory board, the pre-first year summer institutes and academy, hands-on research, mentoring experiences, internships, study groups, and curricula and infrastructure upgrades. Currently, the STEM Academy has 229 undergraduates and 6 graduate students, and these fantastic students comprise a majority of our audience today. STEM students, would you please stand so that we may appreciate what you will do globally for the future? Thank you. I would also like to introduce a very special guest today, Dr. David R Montague, who is the Associate Professor of Criminal Justice and the Director of the Senior Justice Center at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Dr. Montague is also the son of our presenter. Dr. Montague, would you please stand? We are joined by many other special guests in the audience, and we are just excited to have everyone here today, our special guests, and our fantastic faculty and staff. So on behalf of Chancellor Alexander, the UAPB Lyceum Committee, and the STEM Scholars Academy Guest Lecture Spirit and Series, welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. I had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Montague last year as we interviewed her for the cover story of Pride magazine, and I was immediately blown away by her story. I won't insult your intelligence as far as reading what you see on the program. What I will tell you is, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
Learning about her struggle, understanding that she experienced some things that most of you have never experienced, especially STEM students you probably will never experience. What I learned from the piece of the story that I heard from her is that she's incredibly brave, incredibly determined, incredibly resolute to make a difference, to do and achieve everything that she set out to do. The one thing that I will call attention to, and that she's known internationally for, is setting the record of creating the first software program to create a naval ship design. She's known as the grandmother of computer automated design. I think that deserves a round of applause. We were so intrigued by her story, we visited her twice. We thank you for allowing us to impose upon your time. Some of the things you may not know about her is that she is related to W.E. O'Brien. That is her great uncle. So that was already intriguing. Then she was taught by John McGlynn Ross. So a lot of these buildings, a lot of these names, she knows them personally. Doc Jones, the debate team that's named in his honor, that was her debate coach. So as you listen to her, soak in as much as you can. When she finishes, make sure that you take advantage of the Q&A session, because we are truly in the presence of a living legend. It is now my honor, my distinct pleasure, to introduce to you Mrs. Raye Jean Montague.
Thank you so much. And I am honored to be here. The last time I spoke here, my son was 15 years old. I was here as a part of the Kellogg lecture series. And at that time, I was describing ship design and construction. So today, I'm going to talk to you about changing obstacles into challenging situations and being a first. What is an obstacle? It's something that stands in your way, or somebody tries to throw in your way. And what the obstacle says, you can't do it. You're not allowed to do it. For example, when I was growing up, back in the day of segregation, I was told that I could not do a lot of things. People wonder how I decided to become an engineer, being inland, and never really seeing ships. Well, when I was 7 years old, during World War II, they captured a German U-boat off the coast of the Carolinas. A German U-boat was about as big as 4 of your chairs put together. And they brought the U-boat to downtown Little Rock. My grandfather took me to see this U-boat. Why, I don't know. But we walked down, and they allowed me to go up the little ladder and down the hatch into the U-boat. It was a Meritorious submarine. And when I saw the dials and mechanisms, and they let me look through the periscope, I was fascinated. And I said to the guy who was sort of giving a spiel, what do you have to know to do this type of thing? He said, oh, you have to be an engineer, but you don't ever have to worry about that. And I said, you have to be an engineer? He said, yes, but I told you, you don't ever have to worry about that. That won't be something you'll ever do. Well, to be honest with you, I didn't know what an engineer was at the time. So when I got back to my mother, I said, would you take me to find out what it's required to be an engineer? And she did. And of course, there are so many types of engineers, but I knew that I wanted to work with ships because that's what I saw. And at 7, I made up my mind to be an engineer. Well, my mother had told me years ago, when she was a baseball fan, She said, Ray, you have 3 strikes against you. First, you're female, and you're a Negro. That was the term used for us back in those days. And you'll have a Southern segregated school education. But you can do or be anything you want to be, provided you're educated. You must be educated. Well, that was drilled into me. And of course, with Dr. O'Brien, who the bell tower is named for, being my granduncle, he graduated here in 1902 from Branch Normal. And my mother graduated in 1927. So I was 3rd generation college educated. Well, when I went on to high school, there was a Mrs. Holliday, Irma Holliday. When people were talking about what they wanted to be when they grew up, and I said I wanted to be an engineer, these other students laughed at me because they thought I wanted to drive a train. That's all they knew about an engineer. Mrs. Holliday heard it, and she pulled me aside and she said, Ray, don't let them tease you like that, but aim for a star. You might land on the moon. Yes. And I took that to heart. And I'll tell you something later on, I hope if I have time, where I did have something to do with the moon. Okay. When I graduated high school, needless to say, I was not accepted in the one school that offered engineering degree. This is back in 1952. Minorities were not accepted then. So what did I have to do? I came to, at that time, Arkansas A&M College, and I received a Bachelor of Science degree in business. I still wanted the math and science. Those were critical for me. And when I graduated, the day after I graduated, I left and moved to Washington, D.C. I didn't have a job. So I fanned my resume out to all the government agencies. And the first people to call me in for an interview was the Navy. And it was ironic. They looked at my transcript and they said, oh, you've got a Bachelor of Science degree. Well, 1956, that was the leading edge of technology. They wanted people with Bachelor of Science. They said, you'll know all about our computer. Well, I'd never seen a computer, and you know Arkansas didn't have a computer back in 1956. And of course, I'd been taught well at Merrill High School and at A&M College, but nothing stands in your way. So when they said, you'll know all about our computer, I said, of course I did. Well, they sent me to work. I was hired immediately. And they sent me to work in what was called the Applied Mathematics Laboratory at the David Taylor Model Basin, where they did model making for ships. And I was put to work with guys who had graduated from Yale and Harvard with Bachelor of Science in Engineering, and people who had worked on the Manhattan Project developing the atom bomb. They thought I knew what they did because all of us had a Bachelor of Science. I didn't know. But I listened to them and I learned by osmosis. Okay? Well, every morning my job was to go on the computer and compare tapes, magnetic tapes. Data was typed on that. And the console of the UNIVAC 1, serial number 2, second one made, looked like the cockpit of an aircraft with all sorts of switches and buttons. So I'd stand there. The only person allowed to operate the computer was engineers. So I'd stand there and I'd tell the operator what I wanted to do, and he'd do it, and I'd watch him. And one day I said to the operator, his name was John McKendra, John, teach me to operate the computer. He said, no, if I teach you to operate the computer, you'd have my job. I said, okay. Well, you can't stop me from observing you for 6 weeks and think I don't figure out what you're doing. So one day, since I was the first person on the computer every morning, one day, for some reason, all of the engineers called in sick. So I mounted all my little tapes, and I stood there and waited. And after about 15 minutes, I walked over to the console, and slowly but surely, I started to flip switches, and the tapes took off, and I was doing my type-ins. Well, needless to say, my coworkers, I have great peripheral vision, and I could see them peeping around the corner because you weren't allowed to touch this $1 million piece of equipment back in those days. Well, they went and told my boss, and he came up, and I saw him standing there looking at me, and he said, finally walked over, and he said, Ray, I didn't know you knew how to operate the computer. I said, I don't. He said, well, what are you doing? I said, I know enough to get my job done. He said, fine, you know more than the rest of us, so from now on, this is your job. So when the engineers came in the next day, they were told, sit down and teach her. And that's how I became the first non-engineer and female to operate the computer. David telemodel basin. Then my job was to train the other civilians, non-engineers. And I did. And all of a sudden I noticed that the men that I was training were being promoted, and I wasn't. So I went to my manager and I said, hey, this doesn't make sense. I'm training them, teaching them all this, and they're going, you know, getting promoted, and I'm still sitting here at the same grade level. And he said, well, they can work night shift, and you can't because you don't have a car, so you have no way of getting here. And where this installation was situated, no buses ran out there. It was out in the boondocks because it had to be built on solid granite rock in order to test the ship models. So I said, if I had a car, I could work nights, I could be promoted. He said, yeah. Well, he thought that was the end of it. I went home and went to a used car lot, and I paid $375 for a '49 Pontiac. And I had the salesman to drive the car to my home. The next morning I went into work and I volunteered to work midnight shift. And my boss said, you got a car? I said, yes, I've got a car. He said, okay. So I volunteered to work for a month. Well, I'd leave home about 10 o'clock at night and drive oh so slow. I didn't know how to drive a car. And I'd leave 10 in order to be there by 12. Because I'm going across DC into Maryland. And I'd get to work and I'd go, phew. Well, I'd work all night. And in the morning, I got off at 8 o'clock, but I couldn't get out there in the traffic because I couldn't fight that traffic. I didn't know how to drive. So I'd hang around and help the other people on the day shift. And I'd joke and laugh and help them to do all the work. And they thought I was being so helpful. And I'd stay there till about 9:30, and then I'd get in my car and I'd go slowly back home. Well, after a while, I became a little more confident, okay? Well, ironically enough, I had an aunt to die in Little Rock on what was called Black Monday, the day that they integrated schools at Central High. So my mother called and said, come home for the funeral. I said, okay. So I flew home. And one of her friends saw me driving the car. By this time, my mother had a car. When I was growing up, we didn't have a car. Okay, that's why I didn't know how to drive. Well, her friend saw me driving her car and said, Ray, do you have a driver's license? I said, no. He said, you want one? I said, yes. So he went down here to the Pine Bluff courthouse and came back and threw my license over to me. So I never had a driver's test. Well, I went back to DC and I took the written test and they honored my Arkansas driver's test. So I then had a DC driver's test permit. And I went back to work and I'm busy showing it off to my coworkers. And everybody's laughing. And my manager came out and he said, what's so funny? I said, I'm showing him my driver's permit. He said, well, obviously you had one all the time. I said, no, didn't. He said, but you had a learner's permit. And I said, no. He said, you mean you've been driving out here on this major Navy installation without any permission? And he said, who taught you to drive? I said, I taught myself, coming in here at midnight. So anyway, I was promoted. Excuse me. And I went on to work on several computers, new ones that came out. The first transistorized computer was called the Lark. And I became the senior person on the Lark. Well, my manager came to me and said, if you'll oversee the management of the Lark, you'll be promoted to the supervisor level. I said, okay. So here I am, teaching people how to use this transistorized computer and debugging programs. In the meantime, I had sent myself to computer programming school. And after about 6 months, I said to my manager, okay, you said I was going to be promoted. And he said, oh, Ray, I'll tell you the truth. You have the right name, but you're the wrong sex. I can't stand women in supervisory positions. I wish the guys worked as hard as you do, and I hope you won't leave us because we really need you. And I said, well, you can bet your bibby I'm not staying here. Well, I was so ticked off, this is a term I'll use now, that I went back into the theater room and I started filling out applications for other jobs. And people saw me and they heard what he had said to me. And finally, Miss Betty Wright, who was the one who had worked on the Manhattan Project, developing the atom bomb, came down and she said, Ray, did he really say that to you? And I said, yes, he did. She said, well, would you consider coming to work with me? And I said, I'd be honored. Well, this lady had helped develop not only the atom bomb, but she had also worked with Remington Rand in developing the first computers, the Unified. They couldn't afford to pay her in money at that time, so they paid her in stock. So she was filthy rich. She worked because she loved it. Well, anyway, I went to work with her, and she put me in for promotion. And she gave me a copy of the promotion. And she said, just in case they play games with you again, here's a copy of it. You have it. Well, needless to say, that personnel said they lost my promotion. So I said, here's a copy of it. While I was promoted. Well, in the meantime, I became pregnant with my son. And I had a little morning sickness every morning. And, but after 45 minutes, I could go to work and work all day. I had no problems. Well, needless to say, they didn't want me to stay late in the evening because there was nobody to supervise me. Okay. Well, at this time, they came out with what they called a form of time sharing. But I was the beta test center. I volunteered to do the tests. And I stayed every evening for 2 hours. And all these companies like General Electric and RCA, places developed all these systems. They brought them in for me to test. I had 7 different companies, equipment that I was testing. And I was teaching the engineers to use them for numerical control. I understand numerical control is being taught here now. But anyway, I was teaching the guys that. In the meantime, I was able to tell these companies what was wrong with their systems because I was learning from the engineers, okay? You learn from everybody. Well, eventually, I went on to work at what was called the Naval Ship Engineering Center. And remember, I never used a title, so everybody always assumed I was a man. So I was hired sight unseen based on my reputation. And of course, I was in the computer room, and my new boss walked in after 3 days, and he said, "Hey, I've come to meet the new guy." And I said, "Hi, I'm Raye Montague." And you always extend your hand and look them dead in the eye. He said, "You're Raye Montague?" And I said, "Yes, I am." Well, he was racist. And his idea was he had to get rid of me. So what he did was to give me an assignment to work on what they called automated ship specifications. What he didn't tell me was that they'd been working on it for 6 years, and he spent at that time over $600,000 on it. And everybody, well, they didn't tell me it was supposed to be an impossible task. But I found that the company working on it was in New York. So what did I do? On government orders, I went to New York and checked in a hotel and went to work every day on Wall Street with this company called Rosenblatt and Son, who were naval architects. And I found that they were much further along than anybody realized. And because I had started at the bottom with computers, I knew how to tear the systems apart and reassemble them. Well, the guys taught me what was going on with the system, and I was able to revise it and bring it back to DC and put it on the system there. The only time I could get time enough to work on it, because remember, I got to tear the system apart and put it back together, and the Navy wanted 2-column print and upper and lower case, okay? My son's telling me I'm running too long. But anyway, someone using your network, someone told me that IBM had what they called a TN chain, which gave you the upper and lower case. For young people, there was a time when you had the high-speed printer, it only had uppercase. So the Navy wanted upper and lower case. Well, anyway, I worked all day, and then I'd go home. They'd turn the system off at 7 o'clock, and I'd come back at 7:30, fire up the system, and work until midnight. Never charge them anything extra. And I'd go home, come back the next day. Well, the boss who wanted to get rid of me said to me after a couple of weeks, "Raye, you can't come in here and work by yourself at night on this equipment. You'll have to have somebody to work with you." Well, I said, okay. So I checked with the co-workers. Remember, I'm new at the agency, so they resented me anyway because I was the highest level female that they brought into the command. And I asked them, and they said, no, not unless you can pay us overtime. I said, I can't pay you overtime, but if I make this thing work, you'll have all the overtime you want. No, they wouldn't come. So, again, changing the obstacle into a challenging situation. I brought my son, who was 3 years old, and my mother. Sat her in a corner to work crossword puzzles, taught my son to program in BASIC. There was computer language then. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals A plus B, print C. And I put him over and taught him to punch cards and let him punch up all the government's cards. In the meantime, I went on to do my work. And when he got sleepy, I'd put him on a desk and cover him with a blanket. And I continued to do my work until midnight. And I'd go home, come back the next day. Well, after a couple of weeks, the boss comes to me again. Why are you bringing your mother and son in here? They don't work here. I said, you told me I couldn't work alone. And so I'm not alone. He said, why are you doing this? I said, in order to meet my deadline, you gave me 6 months to make this thing work. And the only way I can meet the deadline is to come in at night. He said, are you that determined to meet your deadline? I said, yes, I am. I didn't know I had a choice. Next day, I had a staff who came in from 4 to 12 to work with me. Well, when I got it running, and I went back and I said, give me a true ship to design. And he said, oh, nobody's going to give you a ship. We just didn't believe anybody could make this thing work. We thought it was an impossible task. I said, you mean you gave me what you thought was impossible? And he said, yeah, that was going to be the way that you'd have to leave. And I said, well, I'm really ticked off. So I go back to my desk, and I'm flipping through things, mad as all get up. And about a month later, this is true, President Nixon was in office. And he walked through, and it normally takes 2 years to do the rough draft of a ship. Just the rough draft. And President Nixon told the Navy, instead of 2 years, I want that rough draft done in 2 months. So my admiral and all of his entourage came to me, and they said, the president has given us 2 months instead of 2 years to do this. We can give you a month. Can you do it? And I said, well, it's Columbus Day weekend coming up, and I'll do it over the weekend, or I can't do it. My boss' eyes were this big. You Ray, take the month, take the month. I said, no. There'll be bugs in my program if I can't do it over the weekend. There's no point in me wasting their time and money. If it fails, then let them go on and do it their normal way. Try to. Well, they gave me lead time to get things set up. And I want you to know that I brought that rascal in 18 hours and 26 minutes. Now, when I was working on this ship, it was called the FFG-7, which was a patrol frigate. For that, I was nominated to be the Federal Woman of the Year by the Secretary of the Navy because he said I had revolutionized the design process for all Navy ships. I received the Navy Meritorious Civilian Service Award, which is the 3rd highest honor you can receive in the Navy. No money, but the honor. Well, the ship that I worked on, the FFG-7, was commissioned several years later when it was built as the Arleigh Burke. Remember that name, Arleigh Burke. Well, when the time came for me to receive these awards, I was called aside by a group of guys and told me to not accept the awards, that they could not stand the idea of a black woman receiving such high-level awards when the white women had not received any in the agency. And my retort was, I've deserved many, many awards and never got them, but you can believe I'm going to accept these. There's no way I'm not going to accept it. So there I became a first. Well, all the things that I'm telling you were first. So my life was threatened. If I didn't withdraw, I could no longer work nights. My car was moved to a monitored parking space where they could have cameras watching it. And my particular office was moved across the hall from security so they could monitor me because the death threats were real. That was a disturbing time in my life, but you never let it get you down. You know, I'd come into work every morning and people would say, well, how are you today, Ray? I'd say, I'm great. And after a while they said, you couldn't be great every day. And I said, you'll never know, will you? Well, eventually I helped to develop, well, I was doing CASDAC, computer-aided design and construction after that. And the man who was who wanted to get rid of me fell in love with me. And he became my mentor. And all of a sudden, he said one day, Ray, what do you really want to be when you grow up? I said, I want your job. He was a renowned engineer and the head of so many things. And he said, you know, there are a lot of engineers here who want my job, but you're the first person to stand here with the guts to tell me. So sit down and let's plan the rest of your career. And he became my mentor. And he gave me books to read. He made me bring my lunch to work every day and sit with him. And he taught me ship design and construction. So I ended up with knowing all about how to design ships and how to construct them and do all this stuff. Well, a little time went by, and he said, if you'll read these books, in 5 years, this is going to be the way of the world, and you'll be ready for it. So I took these books, and I couldn't get interested in them. And finally, I flipped one to the back, because I read a lot of things from back to front. That's the Chinese side of me. And all of a sudden, I saw numerical control. And I said, oh, this is my high school geometry. And instead of 5 years later, in less than 6 months, the Department of Defense came down and they said, we need you, his name was Wallace Dietrich, my boss, and they said, we need you to head up a manufacturing technology advisory group that the Department of Defense is establishing. And he said, well, I'm no longer the authority in the area, she is. So here I am, assigned to work with the Department of Defense, working with the Army, the Air Force, NASA, academia, and industry. And we were advising, can you imagine, the Department of Defense on all the manufacturing technology that they were to look at? Here I am, again, saying, how did I get here? Well, I became a leader. I'm a night person. The other guys were day people. So they were awake early in the morning and all, they were going gung-ho. Well, I'd get in there and work with them, but I wasn't very energetic. Well, by evening, because many times the Department of Defense would send us out to different agencies and lock us up. Where we couldn't get out, we'd have to be there for day and night. So we'd continue to work until 10, 11 o'clock at night. Well, the guys are dying out. They're getting tired, but you see, since I'm a night person, I was gone home. And I said, wait a minute, guys, look at this page, look at this. And they said, Ray, don't you ever run down? Well, can you imagine, they had me working on specifications for titanium wings for aircraft. Can you imagine? What did I know about titanium? But here I was, locked up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, working on this facet. And this is at the same time that we sent a spacecraft to the moon. And for the older people, you young guys, you won't know this, but for the older people in the audience, we had a robot that went out to get a sample of the moon soil. And it ran its little arm out and it got the sample, but it could not retract. So the guy who was responsible for that part of the moon mission, his name was George Sally. Well, he was locked up with us there at Wright-Patterson. So NASA sent for him to come back and do this stuff. And we said, oh no, send data to us. We're the experts in the area. So they sent it to us, and we spread the data out onto the floor, and I can't say which one of us found the glitch. But 72 hours later, that arm retracted. Well, Mrs. Holliday was still teaching, I think at Pine Bluff High at that time. And I sent her the article that came out. And I said, baby, you told me to aim for a star and I'd possibly land on the moon. I said, I've been to the moon, baby. Well, let's see. I'm way off track. And I always worked on first ship of a class. And I have some pictures of some of the ships that I worked on. The LHA number 1, which is a landing craft helicopter assault ship. It had 10 monorails, conveyor belts, 10 elevators. It could carry all these Marines, and it was to be unloaded under assault in 4 hours under assault conditions. Lytton Industry had done most of the work on it, and they sent a perfect case to Washington to see if we would accept it. Well, I did an assessment, and I found there was no way they could unload that machine in 4 hours. I mean, that computer. Shucks. David's back there signaling me that I'm going too long. Okay. And anyway, I said, unless I make these changes, we can't accept it. There were 49 changes I wanted made. Well, everything went well until they decided to have a telephone conversation with Lytton Industry and the Navy. And they put me on the telephone. And Lytton heard my feminine voice. And they said, oh no, we want another assessment made. So they sent it to another naval agency. And those guys came back and said, we concur with the assessment made by Raye Montague. So the Navy then took a stand that they wouldn't pay them a dime until they complied with the things that I wanted changed. Well, the Navy sent a captain down there to oversee this, and everything went well. A couple of years later, when you want something to fail, you give it to the busiest person around. So they decided to make me, in addition to the work that I was doing, the federal program women's coordinator. So I did my technical work at night and the federal women's program stuff in the day. Well, I was invited to Panama City, Florida to speak, and then to Pascagoula Naval Shipyard. Well, I went to Pascagoula, and the commanding officer always used to have the VIP from Washington, and I was considered the VIP, to come and have coffee with him. So when I did, he said, I've only heard of one other woman named Raye, but you wouldn't know her. And he kept singing the praises of Raye Montague. About this time, I finally said to him, I'm the same Raye. He didn't think that a person who was technically oriented could also be able to deal with EEO type situations. He said, do you realize you're the reason I was transferred down here? I said, no, I didn't. He said, have you seen your ship? This is the LHA #1. He said, they're building it out there in the harbor. So he called his aide, and this is in August in Pascagoula, and told him to bring me a hard hat and safety glasses, and gave him the keys to his air-conditioned car. And aboard that ship, I had business. The guys were riveting all sides. And here I am, walking aboard the ship. And one of the guys said, what's the first thing you want to see? I said, take me to elevator hold number 10. That thing gave me a fit. Well, anyway, to wrap it all up, I was the first female to receive a registered professional engineer license in the United States and California in manufacturing technology. The reason for that, remember I still don't have an engineering degree, was that the things that I had taught, and I'd represented the United States in foreign countries, talking about CAD CAM, because I had helped to develop CAD, computer aided design, computer aided manufacturing, which is now used for all your cars and clothing and almost everything that's being built. Well, these things were now being taught in engineering school. And so when they wanted to give the registration, as you do to doctors and lawyers as a professional, California was the first state to offer this. And they said, but what about the people who invented this stuff? So I was grandfathered in. Well, a short time later, the guys told me, you can, why don't you apply for registration in Canada? And I did. And again, I was the first female registered professional engineer to become an internationally registered professional engineer in Canada. Well, some of those things are over on the table. You can see them later. lectured at the Naval Academy. That's another first. Ran around the world, spoke to everybody twice. Had to travel a lot. So this gave me an opportunity to expose my son to many, many things and to meet people that he would never meet otherwise. But upon my retirement, I was awarded a flag that had flown over the nation's capital. And the certificate from the architect of the U.S. Capitol stating that that flag was flown in my honor. That was quite a tribute. This was presented to me at my retirement, and it's on the table there. There's also a cannon that was presented to me. It's a replica of the cannons they had on the USS Constitution ship back in the Revolutionary War. It's made out of solid brass, and this was given to generals when they retired. So I spoke at Louisville, Kentucky, and this is where those cannons were made. And they said, "What can we do for you?" I said, "I want one of those cannons." Well, time went by, and they stopped them from making it out of solid brass and started making it out of an alloy. Well, those guys swiped a piece of solid brass, and when I retired, they presented me with my cannon. With my name on it. That was quite an honor. I have a lot of things that I would like to talk to you about, but my son keeps telling me that I'm out of time. So, thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mrs. Montague. Wasn't that an inspiring message and all the firsts that she has accomplished? At this time, I'd like to bring Dr. Lynch up to the podium to come and run our question and answer session.
If you look on your program, you'll see my name. It's kind of symbolic because Carolyn Blakely, what can I say, the spirit of UAPB, is going to be the floor monitor handling all the work. So this is another example, the guy getting the credit and the gal doing the work.
You must have a photographic memory.
Well, yes, I do. I did have.
Yeah.
As I've grown older, things have to rotate in my computer, my metal computer.
All right.
But it still pops out.
Good.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, darling.
I'm James Tyson. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Institutional Advancement here at UAPB. Thank you for coming, number one. You never finished the story about the Arleigh Burke, but I wanted to tell you a personal connection that we have. Way back in my career, I had the opportunity to work at the Old Dominion University, Norfolk, Virginia, where I came into contact with the first commander of the Arleigh Burke, Commander Dick Whalen. So, what happened to the Arleigh Burke?
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up. In August of last year, when we attacked the ISIS, I heard in the news that the missile launchers were being fired from the Arleigh Burke. And I said, I'm still defending my country. Can you imagine after all that time? It was marvelous. Now, I've worked on so many ships, and I hope that you have seen them on the view-graphs. Some of these ships. The last one that I worked on, since I retired in 1990, was a nuclear submarine, which was called the SSN-21 class. I didn't get to finish it because I retired before it ended, but that nuclear sub is out there. And every ship that I worked on has been, except for the ones that were commissioned in the last 15 years, are still afloat. Okay?
Raye Jean Joy.
You got it.
I understand now that you had that in your mind, even though when we went to school from 52 through 56, you knew it was not accessible, and you never lost hope. I wanted to know, the day that we crossed what is now the University, Cedar Street to go PE, and that car hit you and broke your leg or ankle, I want this audience to know she didn't just start this. In a few days, they had us overpass. That we could walk across safely to the other side.
Yes, and I understand that the overpass is gone now. But Cop Collins, for those of you in my age group can remember Cop Collins, he stopped traffic there on 79 to let people pass. And he told my class, we were coming to Dr. Marshall's class over in the administration building, and he stopped traffic and told us to come on across. Well, all these big fancy cars stopped, and my class came out, and here comes this rascal in a ragged little truck that he just paid $50 for, and it didn't have any brakes. And it hit me and broke my leg and cut me in the hip. But you know what? That was a godsend. My mother did not have the money. We were on the quarter system then. And my mother didn't have the money to send me to school the next quarter. And I was worried about how I'm going to finish college, because I've got to finish college so that I can eventually become an engineer. And do you know what? Here's the silver lining. The state of Arkansas had to pay my way through college and buy all my books. And that's how I finished college. Now, you think that that wasn't a godsend? Yes, it was. It was intended to be. And so I remember Dean Wilson. Many of you remember him. Dean Wilson came out to my home because black people were not treated at the hospital then, because white doctors were only used in Davis Hospital. Black doctors couldn't practice there, so Dr. Lawler came to my home and set my leg in my bed. Okay? And Dean Wilson came out to the house and he said, "Well, you'll have to drop all your courses." And I said, "Well, will my mother get her money back for the quarter?" He said, "No." Remember, he was tied to them. And I said, "Well, no, I'm not dropping the courses." He said, "Well, you'll have to take a makeup exam." I said, "Okay, I'll take the makeup exam." Well, remember, the quarter started in January, and my accident was Friday, February the 13th. So I couldn't have been in school for so long in class. I took the makeup exams, and I passed them all, because I can read, and I can remember. Okay? Now, when I came back to school, I was still in a cast and on crutches. And they didn't assign me classes all in one building. I had classes in the administration building, and then my next class was all the way over in the agriculture building. Well, my friends would go down to my locker and get my books and let me head out to class. And I struggled and got across campus. And they were so helpful. Yes,
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much for everything you've been talking about today. My question was, you were always the first in a lot of what you achieved, but as far as patents or being able to be involved with patents, were you able to secure any patents for anything you've ever done? And if so, or if not, why not?
Okay. No, I don't have any patents. But remember the guy that I told you who was my mentor had many, many patents. And he told me that when he died, to look in the trunk of his car and get a lot of the stuff. And I did, but I didn't send it in under my name. I sent it in under his name because he was the one who generated it. To show you how close he became as my mentor, he told his wife that when he died, I was to plan his funeral. So when I heard he died suddenly, and I called his wife, whom I'd never met, and I said, what can I do to help? She said, well, he said you were going to plan his funeral. Because both of us had talked about death, and he knew that I had planned funerals for a lot of my relatives, and I didn't believe in putting a lot of money in the ground. So he agreed with me. And she said, so will you come down? He lived in Baltimore. Will you come and select his casket and things and plan his funeral? So the next day, my mother and David and I went. And we went to the funeral. And of course, the funeral director was showing all these high-priced mahogany caskets with inner-spring mattresses and all that. And the mother-in-law was standing there saying, oh yes, Wally deserves this. I said, we're not looking at that. He does not need an inner-spring mattress where he's going. So then they showed us something else. And I said, no, not that. So the director looked at me and finally said, well, what do you want to see? I said, I want to see an 18-gauge steel casket that is, okay, that's my age gave me. The term will pop in my mind eventually. Hemostatically sealed. And he said, well, are you going to get a vault for him? I said, yeah, I'll get him a vault. And I did. Well, then I had to write his obituary, because his wife really didn't know that much about what he did. And I got that in the newspaper. And he was a Mason. So I stood at the door at the service and greeted the people who came from the Navy, because they knew me, but they didn't know his family. And of course, when the time came, I was going to sit in the back, and his wife said, no, Ray, you come and sit with us on the front seat, because he loved you dearly. And at the funeral, when they presented his flag, his wife had me to join her to receive the flag, and then we passed it on to a Boy Scout unit. That's how close Wally and I had become. But as far as the patents are concerned, no, I never got that far.
Can you explain how your business degree from this institution helped you as you rose in management dealing with engineering?
Oh, yes, that's a valuable thing. I had gone as far as I could as an engineer. And they advertised for a program manager of ships. A program manager of ships is not just a program manager, it's like the CEO of a company. You worry about the ship from conceptualization through the construction until it's in the fleet. Well, again, being female, I ended up being the first female program manager of ships in the history of the Navy. My code was PMS 309. I had 5 field activities reporting to me. They were Pearl Harbor, Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, Norfolk Naval Shipyard, and Indian Head Proving Grounds. I was responsible for, like I said, I had 250 people reporting to me. I was responsible for procurement of CAD/CAM equipment for 111,000 people. And I had a budget of $1 billion. So my degree in business paid off because the engineers, the regular engineers, did not know how to write the requests for the line items. I actually had a line item in the federal budget, and I was speaking everywhere. In fact, I would go to Congress, and I had to speak to the the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on a monthly basis on one of the projects I was working on. And they gave me a parking space at the Pentagon on the days that I was to be there. And I'd go in and flash my little badge and go strutting down the hall to the E-ring and brief Vice Admiral Rich. Well, this went on for several months. And finally, my own admiral called me in, Admiral Jones, and he said, "Ray, I understand you've been over at Pentagon briefing Admiral Rich, Vice Admiral Rich." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I didn't know you were going, and don't do that again unless you let me know." I said, "Well, I can tell you now when I'm going again." He said, "How long have you been doing this?" I said, "About 18 months. He said, "Well, go on, Ray." Yes, just other.
Yes, thank you, Ray. I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming here. You have not only shared your technical information, but you've also shared history. And I think it's so important. And I'm trying to formulate a question that I think would be very important for young people. We have so many young people that are so bright from this institution. And when they graduate, if they do not have, and I guess I'm asking you to help us and to help them to understand, you have to have the strength of courage.
Yes.
And you have to dare to go wherever it is that you need to go so that you can do exactly what you have done. Had you stayed in Pine Bluff, I don't think you would have been making ships. So I'm asking you if you would spend a minute or two just telling our young people. I have one in mind in particular that is in an area, and unless he go out and find and seek opportunity, it's not going to come to Pine Bluff. A physicist. So I would like for you to talk about, if you are in a spot, you have graduated from college, you need to go to find opportunity. So if you would help young people to understand that you may have to leave their comfort zone.
You know, I always say that God sends you what you need. And your life is planned for you. Had I been allowed to attend the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville and get an engineering degree, I would not have accomplished the things that I did. I had to get away from Arkansas. Otherwise, I would have been stuck in some little podunk place doing absolutely boring things. Now, when I went to Washington, even with a college degree, I had to step in at a lower grade than anticipated. But I had a goal, and I was willing to work at it. And you've got to learn and take chances. Don't say, "That's not in my job description." Learn what they're doing and take advantage of it. Add it to your job description later on. One of the things that I learned to do was to go to personnel and look at the write-ups for the different grade levels. And I found that I could describe my job in whatever the terminology they wanted to hear. And I would rewrite my own position description and submit it in their terminology. And I got the jobs. I created almost every job I ever had after the first few, okay? But you've got to get out and find the areas that you can make progress in and do networking. You've got to learn to do networking. You meet people, remember them. This young man said that I had a photographic memory. I remember names and faces and incidents. You must remember these things because you never know when you're going to need them. Remember I told you that the Navy wanted things done upper and lower case? I started to call around to people that I knew who had left my agency and gone to other places. They were the ones that told me about the TN chain. I got the Navy to buy the TN chain, and that made it possible, instead of me trying to develop software to do this, to just pull it in. But again, I would not have known how to do this if I had not had networking. And you don't build networking sitting in your house. Okay? People are not going to drop out of the sky and help you. It's important for you to get out and take a chance. When I talk about the obstacle, and I talk about that being how people try to stop you, then the challenging situation, you find a way around it. Okay? All of us who have excelled have usually gone on to do things in spite of the system, not because of it. We were not allowed to do many things. Look at Dr. Mays here. Eddie Mays went to same high school. His brother was my classmate. And Earl, I love dearly. And I miss him. But Eddie went on to become a doctor. And he spent a career with the military. And he did such fabulous things. He traveled, and now he's come back to Arkansas to share his wisdom. You can't pay for that. In my case, people say, I speak everywhere, anytime I'm invited. And people say to me, well, what is your fee? And I said, baby, I'm free. Anybody who wants to hear me, I'll speak. God has been good. He's provided a good living for me. I don't need to try to get extra money. When you have the things that you need, my role in life now is to inspire young people. Okay? So at any time that somebody wants me to come and speak, I speak at churches and other groups, high schools, elementary schools, and naturally I gear my presentation to their level. And I talk to them about whatever they want to talk about. But it's important for them to realize that most of the time when they read about people like us, they read it in history books. And I usually say to them, honey, you're looking at living history. You know? Yes, darling.
Okay. Hi, so my name is Andre. I'm actually a graduating senior. And it's not really a question or anything, but it's actually a comment. And I just wanted to say that you have truly inspired me to continue to do what I want to do.
Great. Great.
And I'm really glad that you've lived out your experience and now you're coming back to Arkansas, to share your story. And that's really important to me because though not many people in my age group want to stand up and ask you questions or anything, deep down inside, they have been inspired. So you have touched somebody here besides me, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your story. My name is Ariel Duffy, and I...
Are you related to Spencer Duffy?
That's my granddad.
He was my classmate. You know.
Well, then I just want to...
No, come on. And Spencer and I worked together with the Alumni Association in D.C. So I ask you a question, darling.
Okay, thank you. Listening to your story, you said you were the first of many things, and what that speaks to me mostly is that you were not content just doing one thing, just accomplishing one thing. Now, I've done a couple of things in my life, but after every accomplishment, there's a period of time when I just coast. And it didn't seem like you were content doing that. How did you motivate yourself to accomplish more? Or what motivated you?
Well, I saw people doing things, and I saw a need for things, and I didn't realize, as my son says, that I was kicking doors down and breaking glass ceilings, but I was. I saw other people doing things, and I felt, I can do that. Usually I was surrounded by the guys. You know, at first they had a problem with me because this was a white bastard. And how dare this black woman come in and run circles around us. But I did. And after a while I became one of the guys. Well, this was good because I learned from them. And I met other people. And like I said, you remember, I was working with the Manufacturing Technology Group under DOD. Well, this exposed me to all the different services and things I'd never heard of. You know, how the devil would I know about getting to the moon? Okay? And here I am, working with George Sally. That's encouragement. That's inspiration. And you figure, well, what else can I do? What other glass ceiling can I break? And it was very interesting. One of the nice things was, I always say that I'm almost 100 years old. And my granddaughter, when I turned 75, my granddaughter said, "Grandma, how old are you?" And I said, 75. She said, "Oh, let me get my numbers chart." She was just 6 then. And she came back and she looked at me and she said, "You're almost 100. So since then I tell people I'm almost 100. And of course this gets them to talk to me. But anyway, through meeting people and hearing about things, I was always on the leading edge of technology. And that was encouraging to always be the first to do something. And that got me going. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
This will be our last question.
Hey, Ms. Montague. I'm Matthew Wilkins, grandson of Josetta Wilkins. She was talking about me earlier. So my question to you is, when you were talking about your passion, like when you were a child, you saw that submarine when you were little. I'm trying to figure out like what's my passion. I was just wondering if you had any, I guess, any ways you can help me figure out what's my passion. I know I love to teach. I know I love people. And I know I love science, all science. And I was just wondering, how can you find that goal that God has for you?
Well, I went to school with your grandfather, Henry. Your aunt and uncle Janice and Jasper were my classmates at Merrill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Your grandfather wanted to be a lawyer, and as a little boy, he was walking around with a coat that was too big for him and a briefcase. 6th, 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He had a passion. You have a passion for doing multiple things,
Yeah, I do.
and you've got to learn to meld them. Do the one that's going to allow you to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be happy at what you do. Of course, you've got to make a living, too.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay? Fine. You said you like science. What facet of science do you like?
See, that's the problem. Since I chose physics, I love mostly I love mathematics. But from there, I love everything about chemistry, everything that I learned in physics. I love engineering as well. But my main one is mathematical sciences.
Why don't you consider astrophysics?
Astrophysics?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought about that one. That's a good choice.
And then you apply your mathematics there, and you can teach there, because you'll know more than the other people who have gone straight through school and studied nothing but science.
Mm-hmm.
I found that I was always teaching people
Yeah.
in addition to doing the work, and they were fascinated. And by you coming through a liberal arts college, you can define what you're doing much easier than other people. But your passion is what you love to do, but you've got to make the money to get you there.
Yes, ma'am.
And the sciences, at this point in your life, they're ready for leading edge of technology. And the STEM type program is also valuable because you meld all these things together.
Mm-hmm.
If you'll keep in touch with me, I'll try to find things that I think would be of interest.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming today.
I wouldn't miss it.
Next up, on our program, we are to have recognition and acknowledgements, and they will be done by Mrs. Sheena Meadows. And after that, our interim vice chancellor of academic affairs, Dr. Jacqueline Mccoy, will come and do our closing remarks.
I had the opportunity to be exposed to a bit of your story a couple years ago when I attended the Arkansas Black Hall of Fame dinner, and you were being inducted that year. And so I got a glimpse of your story at that point, but today it's been such a privilege to hear more, and you've given us enough now so that we want to learn more about you and all of the changes you've made. We've heard the saying, standing on the shoulders of giants, and so I'd like to thank you for being one of our giants here at the university. At this time, we do have a few tokens we'd like to extend to you, so I'd like to call a few people here to the podium. On behalf of Chancellor Lawrence B. Alexander, I'd like to call forward Mrs. Janet Broles, who is our Chief of Staff for the university. I'd also like to call Dr. Mccoy to the podium. I believe they want us all together. I think they want us all together. In addition to Dr. Mary Benjamin, on behalf of the STEM Scholars and Guest Lecture Series. And so this is a token here extended from the Lyceum Committee and the Chancellor of the university. Next, we are going to ask for Mr. Edward Fontanet to come forward, who is our library director, and he's going to present on behalf of the university and the John Brown Watson Memorial Library System.
Thank you for a marvelous presentation. And what we have done is we've issued this commemorative issue of the Pride with your feature, and wish you the best of luck.
Oh, thank you.
It's a beautiful lady.
Next, I'll ask for Dr. Betty Wright, who serves as president of the Links Incorporated Pine Bluff chapter, And I'd like her to come forward, please, present on behalf of the Links.
Thank you so much. As president, I'd like to give you this token of our love and thank you for sharing your story of determination and perseverance and your great work ethics. That was one of the things that I really got out of that, and you really did put in yeoman's duties, no pun intended. Thank you so much.
Dr. Benjamin, come forward to present on behalf of the STEM scholars.
It's such a pleasure. This is on behalf of the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff STEM Academy. We've worked on this for more than 10 years because of that program. That's why we have the facility where we are now standing. And our students wanted you to have a token to take back with you. And we thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we do have a final presentation here from the Alpha Rho chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. It's Erica Mccoy.
We just wanted to present you, Soror Raye Jean Montague, for your fantastic story. Really appreciate you, and we just wanted to give you a little appreciation as well. So thank you for coming, and we really did enjoy it.
Well, thank you, darling. And you know, for those of you who've been in my life a long time, I want you to know that I crossed the sands into Alpha Rho chapter in April of 1954.
Mrs. Montague, you can be, that was our final one. I think there are some others that will come forward proceeding our program today. But you have taught us so much about observation and mentorship and mentality. And so we're just going to take that and continue to hold on to it as we continue to try and strive to at least possess half of what you've given us today. Thank you.
What can I say? As I sat on the stage and looked at the audience, it was the most inspiring vision for me. Everyone's attention was focused. Everyone was taking in everything that was being said. That let me know that this kind of speech, that this kind of life that has been lived by Mrs. Montague is an inspiration for everyone. I could not believe the look on the students' faces. They never wavered. And so, Mrs. Montague, that's an indication of what you meant to this university today. You have been an inspiration to all. And as I was sitting there, I was thinking that this would be a great opportunity to have the students do some journaling, to reflect on what this message meant to them and how it will influence their lives in the future. But unfortunately, students had classes to go to, and many of them have left. But we have 3 STEM department heads still in the building and some STEM faculty members. So I want to just ask you all to have your students do a little reflective journaling, and so that this experience will be embedded in them, and they will have something that they can call up, they can look back on, and make decisions and let it influence their lives as they strive to become achieving professionals. To the audience, you've been great. You all are still here. I could sit down and let Mrs. Montague come back, and you all would still sit there and just soak in all that she has given us today. This has been a marvelous program, and we thank all of you for coming. I just got 2 little announcements that the program chair gave me. First, she wanted you to know that Mrs. Montague would not accept an honorarium. She already told you she speaks free. She would not accept an honorarium because she feels that she has been blessed and believes in giving back to her community and to the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And she has certainly done that today. Her son, Dr. David Montague, as has been announced before, prepared the display of artifacts on the table. and we invite you all to go by and observe the mementos of her life and her career. Thank you so very much for coming. It has truly been a worthwhile experience.